Abdul من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, we welcome you to yet another exciting edition of our series. We are running the series of the Fiqh of marriage. Dr. Abdul Hafiz takes us through this very tremendous insight of how we contemplate and how we deal with issues that relate to the marriage by addressing the contemporary issues which will help us remain within the parameters of our deen. Dear brothers and sisters, currently we are focusing on the artificial reproductive technologies, call them the AL-HIDAAYA, among which we want to focus on issues that are not limited to artificial inseminations, those of you who know the IVFs, among others. We want to question, and Dr. Hafiz in the previous episode, he took us through the appreciation of the fact that now technology is improving, the demands of the societies are changing, and also the perceptions of people are no longer the same. The way technology runs cannot leave us Muslims not giving attention to it. That's why now and then we need to have these scholars help us interpret how the contemporary things can be attributed within the spheres of our deen. Dr. Hafiz went ahead and told us or reminded us about the fact that we can no longer run away from issues that are surrounded within the marriage circles. Husbands are in Japan, wives are in Australia, but we need a kid. Those technologies are available, but was Islam silent about them? Or if Islam addressed them, how did Islam address them? These are the key questions that we need to answer. Dr. Hafiz is the Director of Sharia at the Faculty of Arabic Islamic Studies and Arabic Language of the Islamic University in Uganda. He's also the Director of Sharia at the Office of the Supreme Mufti. He's also a scholar and also one of those researchers who have vested their interest in aspects not limited to human rights and other Islamic phenomena. We thank him for always sparing this time with us, and we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant him the best out of it. Dear brothers and sisters, we thank the Next Media through Salam TV, the AL-HIDAAYA media for the official broadcasts of our programs. We thank the management of Islamic University in Uganda for the tremendous work they are doing to give us the enabling environment and the tech support to ensure that we broadcast to you this program. I'm Abdul Hakim, who is also a student of Dr. Hafiz Walusi. Dr. Hafiz, in the previous program, we introduced ourselves to the artificial reproductive technologies. And we agreed that technology is no longer the same, and technology always brings us into the dilemma of appreciating whether we should continue with a given aspect or not. But all Muslims are around. We appreciate technology, but our fear is, shall we remain within the parameters of deen? We welcome you to come and address us.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah wa sallallahu wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Respected brothers and sisters in Islam, I salute you with the best salutation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to take this opportunity welcome you to the continuation of our presentation on the assisted reproductive technologies. And we are so convinced that this is one of the areas that a contemporary Muslim lady and gentleman should not miss to know. What is the Sharia provision? How does Sharia regulate these technological issues? In our previous episode, we felt that it is important to prepare people who could be clients of artificial insemination, the potential customers or the potential clients of this kind of technology. We looked at the significance of procreation in Islam, and then after that we also addressed the situation where it has been confirmed by the medical doctors that you cannot have a child through the natural way. And maybe this is what leads people to continue to seek for this blessing of a child by embracing the technology. Brothers and sisters in Islam, these technological advancements in reproduction, I wish to appreciate the fact that when you go to the dictionary of medical jurisprudence, you might find out that some of the terminologies that we use might not be applicable today, but ours is the objective of bringing out the general understanding of this technology and also see how does Sharia intervene into it. From the Sharia perspective, the assisted reproductive technologies have been looked at from two dimensions. That is from the Sharia perspective. The first dimension is whether these reproductive technologies are conducted or they take place between people who are legally married according to the teachings of Islam, and whether they are being practiced by people who are not legally married according to Islam. And whether they are married or not, there are always two methods or approaches. If, for instance, a particular couple is legally married according to Islam, the question that comes in immediately is that, are they going to practice this kind of technology without an intervention of a third party or not? And if they are not married, are they also going to have an intervention of the third party or not? That is one side that inshallah our discussion is going to address. The second side is, how is it going to take place? Sometimes this technology takes place by just removing the gametes, let's say the sperms, let us say the ova of a lady, and then have them fertilized outside. Then after that, they are immediately injected back. Or there is another process that is passed through before injecting back this fertilized egg back to the woman. It is from this perspective that you hear the scientific technologies such as the in vivo and the in vitro fertilization. So, we want first of all to start by looking at the assisted reproductive technologies, if they are being practiced among the married people. What happens is that when a particular married couple is finding some challenges with having a child through the normal or say the natural way, they happen to visit the fertility clinics. And when they visit them, usually the assumption is that the medical doctors are going to induce the husband in order to produce the semen. It can be through masturbation or any other way that is known by the medical doctors. Then once this semen has been induced and has been collected from the husband, then it can be injected into his wife so that fertilization can take place. This kind of a situation is justified by some of the reproductive anomalies that may be found either in the husband or in the wife. For instance, medical doctors can find out that the husband is suffering from the low sperm count, or the nature of his sperms are so weak in order to have a natural insemination. Or they can also establish that the birth canal of a woman is experiencing or is having an acidic atmosphere that actually burns or kills the sperms before reaching the fertilization spot. So in such a situation, there is need to induce or to collect the husband's semen, gather them outside, and then have the fertilization take place. Then through the technology that is known by the medical doctors, because in this respect, as my moderator was saying in the previous episode, they are the Ahlul Dhikr. So they have their own way of getting or collecting the semen from the husband, and then they have their own way of collecting the ovum, for instance, from the wife, and then after that, fertilization takes place, and after fertilization has taken place, then you find out that the insemination goes on. If this kind of artificial insemination takes place between a couple which is legally married, what is the position of Islam on it? Because what is known is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the natural system. The natural system requires that a husband meets his wife sexually, and then after that, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decided that as a result of this intercourse, fertilization is going to take place, it shall take place. But due to some reproductive anomalies, as I have said, maybe the couple had tried this and it is not giving any results. Now the question is, if a married couple chooses to go for artificial insemination, whereby the only process that is involved is to get the sperms from the husband, then fertilized with the ovum from the wife, how does the Sharia regulate this kind of arrangement? The majority of our land scholars, to mention some of them, the likes of Dr. Muhammad Shaltut, then Sheikh Jadul Haq, Ali Jadul Haq, Mustafa Ahmad al-Zarqa, the late Imam Yusuf al-Qardawi, the late Professor Wahbat al-Zuhaili, among others, they held a position that it is allowed for a married couple that has failed to get a child through the natural way of insemination to go for the artificial insemination. That is their position. And this is the position that was held by the Islamic Fiqh Academy. This is what we call Al-Majma' or Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami. I usually emphasize this point when we talk about Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami because of one reason. Today, there is little regard to individual fatwas. You can approach me as Abdul Hafiz and you ask me a question, then I give you my individual perspective, which might actually not be right, might not be the right one. So what happens is that we are now advocating for the collective fatwa. The collective fatwa, according to the contemporary setting, it is the one which is provided by the Islamic Fiqh Academy. It is an established body by Rabitatul Alam al-Islami that is handling contemporary issues such as this issue that we are handling today. But we also need to find out and to ask ourselves, what is the basis on which the Islamic Fiqh Academy ruled in favor or in permission of this kind of artificial insemination among the marrieds? Their conclusion of permissibility was based on the analogy. That's what we call qiyas, that there is no such a fundamental difference between this kind of insemination and the natural insemination, because both of them take place as a result of sexual intercourse. And what is more important here is that this sexual intercourse or this mating takes place within the lawful circles of Islamic law. So as long as the man's semen had been used to inseminate the woman's ovum, and these two are legally married, then there is no problem with that. That is the basis on which the Islamic Fiqh Academy, they based on in order to make this kind of conclusion. Not only that, but this position is also consolidated by the fact that procreation, seeking for a child, is a primary objective, which if we cannot get it through the natural form, why not go for the scientific one? In fact, when you go to Al-Mu'jam al-Kabir li-Tabarani, this is a collection, the general collection of Imam al-Tabarani. He narrated a hadith, although this hadith has been held to be weak by some scholars of hadith, and this hadith is narrated by Hafsa radiyallahu anha, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "La yada' ahadukum talab al-walad." One of you should not give up to look for a child. La yada' ahadukum talab al-walad. None of you or one of you should not give up to look for a child. فَإِنَّ الرَّجُلَ إِذَا مَاتَ, because when a man dies, وَلَيْسَ لَهُ وَلَدٍ, and he dies without leaving behind any child, انقطع اسمه, his name is like it has come to an end. He shall no longer be remembered. Even though this hadith has been held to be weak, but it has been used by scholars to consolidate the position of looking for a child as much as possible, as long as the partners are legally married. Ladies and gentlemen, not only that, but the scholars who gathered in the Islamic Fiqh Academy also advanced another proof to support the permissibility of resorting to artificial insemination among the marrieds. They reasoned that what these partners are suffering from is an infertility. And an infertility is an anomaly. It is a disease. And this disease, it can be addressed by resorting to the scientific methods. And that is why they say that if this kind of anomaly is actually causing this kind of psychological stress, and it even leads the married couple to start despairing from attaining the noble objective of marriage, and that is procreation. Why not resort to artificial insemination? Once we take infertility as a disease, as an ailment or an anomaly, immediately we shall invoke the hadith narrated by Abu Huraira, and the hadith is found in Bukhari, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ma anzala Allahu da'an illa anzala lahu shifa'an." Allah has never decided, has never revealed, or has never brought any kind of disease except there is also a cure for that disease. So if previously people who were failing to get children through the natural way had not gotten the cure for that, artificial insemination has come in order to give them the remedy, to give them the relief, to give them the cure. But I don't want my audience to forget that as partners choose to go for this kind of insemination, it is not free from all Sharia inconsistencies. And that's why I always advocate for a holistic addressing of the matter. Yes, you are married, you are a husband, you are a wife. The insemination is going to take place between the two of you without the involvement of the third party. But this process involves exposure of the private parts. And you know how Sharia was so strict, was so careful about guarding or covering someone's privacy. You know that hadith that is narrated by Bahaz bin Hakim an abihi an jaddihi. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم احفظ عورتك. You see, yes, artificial insemination is allowed among the marrieds, but it is involving a Sharia inconsistency, a Sharia prohibition that is exposing their private parts. Because whether a husband or a wife, at least one of them, if not both of them, shall have to expose their private parts, yet this is prohibited by Sharia. The hadith which is narrated by Bahaz bin Hakim says, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ihfadh awratak illa min zawjatik aw ma malakat yaminuk." He says that cover your private parts, cover your privacy. If you are to expose it, you are only allowed to expose it to your spouse, to your wife, or to your husband. Aw ma malakat yaminuk, or to those slave girls that you get out of jihad or out of buying, as it used to be the system during slavery time. Then the man said, فَأَفَرَأَيْتَ إِنْ كَانَ الرَّجُلُ خَالِيًا. The Sahaba asked, "O the Prophet of Allah, how do you see if a man is alone? Is he also not allowed to expose his privacy?" The Prophet replied with a short answer. He said that even if he's alone, فَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَنْ يُسْتَحْيَا مِنْهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that person should be having some kind of modesty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the hadith is narrated by Imam at-Tirmidhi. Now the question that comes in is that this insemination, yes, it is allowed, but it is involving the exposure of private parts. Doesn't this rule it out into impermissibility, into prohibition? Even after the scholars have recognized the fact that it involves exposure of private parts, still a big section of them, especially the Maliki, the Shafi'i, the Hanbali, they went ahead to say that this is a situation of necessity and it is allowed. It is only the Hanafi scholars who ruled against the exposure of private parts for treatment. The exception given by the Hanafis is that only in one situation of necessity, whereby that patient is exposed to death or faces unbearable pain. So, of course, that is it. But what we want to conclude out of this is that the process involves exposure of private parts, but even with that, the Islamic Fiqh Academy, in its 8th sitting that took place in Oman in 1997, they ruled in favor or in permitting this kind of technology or this kind of a method. What is the conclusion, brothers and sisters? The conclusion here is that if the married couple is having this kind of a challenge, they cannot get the child through the natural means, then they walk into the sperm clinic or the fertility clinic, and then they are told that the anomaly that they are facing, what they are suffering from, it can be surpassed by going into an artificial insemination, whereby the sperms are taken from the husband and the ova is taken from the wife, then inseminated. There is no problem according to the scholars of Islam. So they are allowed to go ahead and seek for a child as long as they have followed that. However, we should also be very careful on the issue of exposure of the private parts, and if it involves, as we have said, it should only be under the situation of necessity, as far as the medical doctors can say or can approve. So, having said that, then here we need to look at the legitimacy of the child that will come out of this kind of arrangement. It shouldn't be taken for granted that the fact that this kind of arrangement had been allowed, that the child is going to be legitimate. You know, those are fiqh issues that maybe we shall have to address at an advanced level. But when a child is gotten out of the system, there is no doubt that all scholars went by the ruling that the offspring, the result of that, or the child that is born out of that, that child is a legitimate child. That child is waladul halal. He is a legitimate child, and he has all the rights that are accorded to a child who is legitimate. So that is the first. And what we have just addressed is where artificial insemination has taken place between a husband and a wife without involvement of any other process. Now let us look at what has been popularly known as test tube babies. When we talk about test tube babies,
before you take us to that second form,
yes,
you see, this is a very critical. It's a very critical topic. So I want to pick with my colleagues such that we move together. May I summarize the first one by saying that this form is allowed with these conditions. One, the couple must be married halal, the halal marriage.
Yes.
The second one, I don't know from the discussion I've picked, it's as if we must be using the sperms from the husband.
Yeah.
And as if somewhere you talked of the ovaries from the wife.
The ova, yeah.
Yeah. So far, those are three conditions, and I'm seeing you also limiting it within the Islamic kind of environment.
Yeah.
So can I pick those three to form my first form of permissibility?
True.
Would I be right?
Yeah. Okay. The simple summary is this is allowed by three conditions. One, it must take place between people who are legally married. Number two,
you are the one who said there is a difference between illegally married and Islamically married. You are the one. Were you the one? Because I remember.
No, I'm not the one.
You are not the one.
They are legally married.
Yes.
That is, they have fulfilled the conditions of nikah that we talked about. Then number two, the gametes used, it must be specifically the sperms from the husband and then the ova from the wife. You know? Then the third one is they must do that out of necessity. It shouldn't be a luxury. It shouldn't be a luxury. Those are the three conditions that the scholars came up with in order to allow this kind of, or this form of artificial insemination. Let's go to the second form. The difference between the first form and the second form is that it involves the use of, they used to be called petri dishes, but the popular name is test tube babies. What happens is that when the sperms of a husband have been extracted from him, so is the ovum or the ova of the wife. They don't fertilize them immediately, but they have to collect them somewhere, and then the fertilization takes place like in a test tube. Then it goes into certain development levels. From this level to another level, the medics know this, until the right time when they feel that this fertilized egg is now mature enough, then it can now be implanted or injected to the uterus of the wife. And that is why it is called test tube babies. Because fertilization now is going to take place within that tube, then it goes on with certain developments until a certain level of maturity. That is when the fertilized egg now, it is going to be taken back or implanted or injected into the uterus of the wife. That is the only difference. Now, people might think that it is as simple as we describe it. It is not. The Ahlul Dhikr, the medics, they must study the woman's ovulation time and then also know what time the ovum is going to move from the fallopian tube. And then they do this maybe by using what they call the laparoscope. Then after that, they use a catheter in order to pick that ova or to pick that ovum. Then after picking it, have it somewhere in the test tube. Then after that, fertilization can take place, and then it continues as we have just explained. So the only difference between the first and the second is that fertilization in the second takes place in the test tube, and that is why this common name of test tube babies had been known, or it had been always said. Now, what is the position of Sharia on this additional process? The majority of scholars allowed this form of insemination, but of course also with the same conditions. Number one, it must be by necessity. It shouldn't be by luxury, as we have said. Then number two, it must be by consent of both married people. The point of consent, the point of tarazi or arriba, is very significant in Sharia, especially in issues of contracts. Now that we are going scientific, there must be the consent of both partners. But also, there must be a lot of strictness to ensure that these gametes are not mixed. Because of the involvement of this test tube, you might find it somehow, somewhere, that the gametes have been mixed, and therefore this is going to lead to the mixing of lineages, and once lineages are mixed, then it is creating a very serious problem according to Sharia. So that is also another form that the scholars have also allowed. In other words, whether insemination takes place immediately or directly without the involvement of the test tube, or it takes place with the involvement of the test tube, Alhamdulillah, our contemporary scholars have ruled in permission of this kind of arrangement. Now, as science as technology continues to develop, there comes another scientific approach. This is now called the frozen sperms. The science or the fertilization with frozen sperms. Now, this idea, according to history, it started somewhere in 1950, and then it was advanced, and today when we talk about the frozen sperms, we are talking about the sperm banks, because this is what now you find that someone had gone there, donated his sperms, and then these sperms are going to be kept for some time and a certain degree that is known by the medical doctors, and therefore you have your own depository. You have your account somewhere there. I was also reading somewhere and I found out that this kind of technology was used by the Americans during the War of Vietnam, that people who were going for that war, because of the risk that the soldiers are going to die from there, they were told that they can save their sperms, and their sperms can be kept in the bank, so that if they die from the battlefield, their wives can actually go and inseminate or fertilize themselves with the sperms which had been kept in those sperm banks. Now, from that, as we said, you have the idea of sperm banks. You know, this matter is very interesting. As we talk today, for us, we are keeping bank accounts for money. Some people are actually having their bank accounts for their semen or for their sperms. And they are categorized into two. This is where science and technology has reached. Some people are actually having private sperm bank accounts that you can go there and check on your account and you are sure that your deposit is still intact. But this is now private. Private in such a way that it is only you who has a right to access and usage of the sperms that have been deposited there. And maybe your relatives, according to the agreement that you can enter into with the bank, that is the sperm bank. But also, to make matters worse, there are public bank accounts, sperm bank accounts. In other words, you can go to the sperm bank, especially ladies, and then they are given the catalog, just like the way you go to the library and you are looking for a certain book. Then they give you a catalog, whether these are traditional or the digital catalog, and then you check for the physical features of the child that you want. And this has been, by the way, so much utilized by some women in the Western countries. The woman walks into the sperm bank, then she's given a catalog of sperms together with the features that I want my child, for instance, to be of such a level of intelligence, of such and such a height, of such and such a color. Then they will say that if that is the choice of the child that you want, here is your choice. And at the end of the day, she will have to pay for that. So this is where the world has reached. Now, if that is the situation, whereby you have either the private account or you have the public account, how does the Sharia come into this? You know, if it is a private account, if a husband, for instance, had decided to keep his sperms in a private account in the bank, is it allowed for his wife during the lifetime of the husband to use that sperms or not? That is one side. Then the second side is, suppose this man dies and he had kept his frozen sperms in that bank. Is it allowed for this wife to go to the bank and then claim for that sperm so that she can fertilize it with herself? You know, sometimes when we're addressing these matters, sometimes you might think that they are very far away from us. But with the technological advancements, time shall come whereby we are facing this kind of reality. Now, if it takes place during the lifetime of the husband, this can be connected to the two forms that we have just discussed. In other words, it might be acceptable, it might be permissible according to the scholars. But maybe the challenge now is how man had decided, to undermine, to despise himself to an extent that now he wants to get out of his sperms and keep it somewhere. I don't know what could be the motive, what could be the primary objective of having your sperms collected somewhere. Maybe it is to decrease on the risk. Maybe it can be to address emergencies, among other issues. But to a general extent, that one might be, it might be added, or it might be addressed in the same way you have just addressed the two forms. But the form or the method that caught the attention of the scholars, as I have ever told the story, that one person or one man from Germany had actually kept his sperms in the bank, in a private account. Then when he was flying from one destination to another, he had a plane crash and this person died. And then his wife went to this sperm account to claim. Suppose this couple was a Muslim couple and the husband has died, having kept his sperms in the bank. Is it allowed for a wife to go and claim for that sperm deposit and use it to fertilize herself? This is where you find out that some scholars, by the way, allowed it, that the wife can utilize it, but on condition. The rules of Sharia, sometimes you look at them in a traditional way, but time comes whereby you can see their significance. You know that after the death of a husband, a woman is supposed to go into the iddah. That's what we call the awaiting period. So the scholars are saying that as long as this woman is still in her waiting period, to a great extent, 4 months and 10 days, then they say there is no problem. That woman can utilize the frozen sperms of the husband to fertilize herself. That is if there is guarantee that it was kept intact, it was kept safe. This is the fiqh. Now, if we ask them, if we ask those section of scholars, that section of scholars, on which basis do you rule in favor of that? They will invoke the hadith of Aisha, which actually the Prophet ﷺ made, not in any way related to the subject of our discussion, but by use of analogy, they happen to apply it here. What is that hadith? Aisha radiallahu anha narrates that one time the Prophet ﷺ had traveled to a place known as Baqi'. Then when he came back, he found me when I was having severe headache. Then she was so much complaining about too much headache, until the Prophet said that, Ya Aisha, or Aisha, ma dharraki, what do you lose? Or what hurts you? Law mitti qabli, if you die before me, faqumtu alayk, then I take up on you, faghassaltuki, and I wash your body, wa kafantuki, and I also shroud you, wa sallaytu alayki, then I lead your janaza, wa dafantuki, and I also lead the team to take you to your qabr. Now, when you look at that hadith, you might not see the relationship between that hadith and the mas'ala, the issue that we are discussing. But what scholars took out of this is that the marital relationship remains between the husband and the wife even after death. That is the conclusion of the scholars. Now, having said that, when it comes to the subject of our discussion, they say that in the same way the Prophet was saying that there is no problem that he can handle Aisha even after death, it means that the marital relationship remains. And therefore, if the husband dies, having kept his sperms in the sperm bank, there is no problem for the wife. She can also go and access it because the marital relationship still continues, especially that she's still observing the iddah. That is the beauty of fiqh. That is the conclusion that is made by some scholars. Now, there is one contemporary scholar who, after basing on that hadith, brought this meaning closer to us. That scholar is by names of Dr. Abdul Al-Khayyat. This is his statement, and allow me to read it verbatim. He said that وَقَدْ يَلْجَأُ الرَّجُلُ إِلَى حِفْظِ مَنِيِّهِ فِي مَصْرَفٍ مَنَوِيٍّ لِحِسَابِهِ الْخَاصِ. That a man can resort to keeping his sperms in a private account in the sperm bank. ثُمَّ يَتَوَفَّى. Then after that, that man passes on. وَتَأْتِي زَوْجَتُهُ. Then his wife comes, بَعْدَ الْوَفَاةِ, after the husband had died, فَتَلْقَهُ دَاخِلِيًّا بِنُطْفَةٍ مِّنْهُ وَتَحْمِلُ. Then this wife comes, she picks this semen from the bank, and then she inseminates herself with it, and then she conceives. Then this scholar said, وَالْحُكْمُ فِي هَذَا. The ruling in such a situation is, al-waladu waladuhu. The child is his, meaning that the parentage is established with the deceased. وَأَنَّ الْعَمَلِيَّةِ. And that this work, وَإِنْ كَانَتْ غَيْرَ مُسْتَحْسَنَةٍ فَهِيَ جَائِزَةٌ شَرْعًا. That this kind of technology, this kind of practice, even if it is not good, but it is allowed, it is permissible. You know, that is why we must handle the fiqh terms with a lot of care. He's talking about غَيْرَ مُسْتَحْسَنَةٍ. It is not desired, فَلَكِنَّهَا جَائِزَةٌ, but it is permissible. He continues to say that فَإِنَّ الْوَلَدَ يَثْبُتُ نَسَبُهُ. The parentage or the paternity of this child gotten after the woman has fertilized herself with the sperms of the fallen husband, the paternity is established. Why? لِأَنَّ الْفِرَاشَ قَائِمٌ بِقِيَامِ الْعِدَّةِ. Because the two are still considered as husband and wife because of the subsistence of the waiting period. So, that is the statement that is made by Dr. Abdul Al-Khayyat. The person who is interested in that, in further research, you can go to his book, Hukm al-Hukm fil Islam. That is the book by Dr. Abdul Al-Khayyat. Now, you could see that what the scholars actually concluded on is that the wife can use the frozen sperms of the husband and fertilize herself with it as long as the waiting period is still continuing. Why? Because the marital relationship is still there as long as the waiting period is still there. But should we also take it generally that really because of the continuity or because of the subsistence of the waiting period, therefore the husband is allowed to utilize his wife after death, and also the wife is allowed to utilize the remains like the sperms of the husband after death? Yes, to some scholars they take it like that, but a section of scholars said that no, even if the woman is still in the waiting period, as long as the husband has died, there are some rights which continue. There are certain permissibilities that are allowed and are embraced by Sharia. But when it comes to sexual enjoyment ends with death. In other words, we should distinguish between two. Some of the rights that continue to be there after death and the right to sexual enjoyment. The right to sexual enjoyment, according to the section of scholars, and this is my opinion, it actually terminates immediately with death. That is why in the books of the Malikiya, you'll find out that if, for instance, a husband happens to go into sexual intercourse with the wife after death, you know, to them it constitutes a form of zina, but the zina that does not actually qualify him to be stoned to death. Why? Because of the existence of what we call shubha. Maybe he thought that even if after her death, after all, she's still my wife. But the point that I want to bring out very clearly is that there are certain rights which continue to be established between the husband and the wife after death, but sexual enjoyment in whatever forms, that one terminates immediately with death. Since fertilization, insemination is part of the sexual enjoyment, it goes without saying that sperms are not part of the inheritable estate. Sperms are not part of the rights that continue in the way that the husband is free, the wife is free to continue using them in order to fertilize herself. Not only that, but this form will rule in, we are saying that it is prohibited. Why? Because it involves some Sharia inconsistencies. Some of the inconsistencies include the mixing of lineages. There might be no such certainty that really this is the sperms of the fallen husband, and the process that through which the woman can pass through in order to access it, it can actually be marred or mixed with some of the inconsistencies according to Sharia. Not only that, but if a woman chooses to fertilize herself with the sperms of her husband that were kept in the bank, when this husband is dead, she is actually leading to the change of Sharia rules. What are some of the Sharia rules? By the time this husband died, this woman immediately became a widow. And when she became a widow, there are certain ways how we look at widows vis-a-vis the iddah. By the time of his death, this woman was not pregnant. And the iddah, the waiting period for a pregnant woman, it is known to be 4 months and 10 days. Now, if she chooses to inseminate herself with the sperms of the dead husband, she's changing the status from the widow who is not pregnant, who is supposed to observe 4 months and 10 days, to a pregnant widow. And the waiting period for a pregnant widow is actually up to delivery. So it is extended. Now, basing on this, I am going with the view of those who say that it is not allowed after the death of the husband for a woman to walk into the sperm clinic where the husband deposited the sperms, which are frozen, and then use that sperm to inseminate herself, because this is going to change the Sharia rules. That is another form. I don't know whether you have any intervention that you want to make before we continue.
I know our chemistry. You can feel like I want to ask you something.
Yes.
We looked at I will call it also the test tube. Doctor, by the way, as you are lecturing us, there is a book which has already been posted on our WhatsApp group.
Good.
It's about Hassan Fadil wrote a book, Islamic Viewpoint on the New ARTs.
Good.
And whatever you are saying is exactly what he's saying in his book.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, and we have posted it on our WhatsApp. Now, I want to ask, the test tube ones, you told us that it is almost like the other one, but this one, you keep it, and then they bring it in the mother's womb. If I can use that, really, with all due respect, I'll use the normal English I know. Now, here on the frozen sperm, you have told us there are those who may agree with it, and your take is you are not agreeing with it.
Yeah.
Now, this is where my question is. Doctor, as we are going on the reasons why it is being prohibited, that frozen...
the frozen sperms.
What you are not addressing is where it should be kept.
Where it should be kept?
There are those, because you have told us there are those scholars who are okay with it.
Yeah.
And even they reach an extent, from the example you gave us when you remember the Americans, as you were saying, some people die and then the spouses would wish to use the sperm.
Yeah.
From us, the Islamic perspective, in that scholarly, those who would allow it, the frozen sperm bank things, where should we store it? What do they say about where they should store it?
They have there is no difference of opinion among scholars on where it should be kept. It should be kept where it is intact and where it can be preserved. And of course, that can only be in the sperm bank, because there are certain levels, there are certain degrees under which such sperms should be kept so that they are not spoiled. So they have no problem with that. Their concern is that, is it kept intact in such a way that it does not mix with others?
You know qiyas?
Yes.
I want to use qiyas. Not a scholar.
Yes.
Doctor, don't you think that alone disqualifies it? Because this is a sperm.
Yeah.
This is a baby. This is my baby.
It's not yet a baby.
Okay, call it whatever.
Semen.
Okay, this is semen.
Yeah.
And you are using the term garments somewhere.
Yes.
I'm storing it in a place which must have all the conditions that satisfies its storage.
Yeah.
But to say, few humans, if any, can possess that storage. Are you saying that you are leaving your storage in the hands of another person? And it spoils the other condition you said. Remember the condition that you must be sure that that is the sperm you are using. Don't you think that risk alone of you storing it, and I'm just using my analogy, I'm not using it. Can you qualify it or disqualify it?
Yeah, I'm going to address it in two ways. The first way is that you are mixing the sperm bank with the diary bank. Where
No, doctor, I'm talking of the sperm bank, by the way.
Because in the diary, this is whereby you see that the milk that has come from Busunju, the one which came from Masaka, all of them, it is kept somewhere. But in this case, I just wanted to take you there. But in this case, you know, these banks, they are taken to be based on amana. They are based on trust. You know, just the same way, the analogy actually you can use here is where you keep your money in the bank. But of course, money is money. When I bring mine, all of it is money. But what matters is that my deposit is intact, which is different actually from this. In this case, those ones who are in charge of these banks, the sperm banks, they must have signed some agreements. And these agreements actually put them on the task of protecting and keeping your sperm account intact without any adulteration or any impact or any effect of others. But of course, as you say, human error, you know, we cannot rule out human error. That is why, by the way, from your kind of analogy and from a kind of reasoning, you happen to agree with me that I go by prohibition of this method, because there is lack of that kind of certainty, you know, and there is lack of that kind of certainty. And that's why, by the way, the scholars even went into prohibiting this kind of arrangement, you know, because of those uncertainties, because of those issues that might be involved in keeping it intact, among others. That's what I can say. Yes.
As doctor takes a sip of water, we are trying to analyze the various assisted reproductive technologies. A lot of scholars have actually written about it, and we appreciate this because it's now coming to us to give us a summary of the same. We have looked at so far 3 forms, and these forms are actually so in depth. And I would wish to let him now take these few minutes, because we are out of time, to take us through the other aspects, inshallah. I'm seeing the questions that are flowing. People are bringing the surrogacy issues here, which we shall address later on.
Okay. Thank you so much. Maybe the second last bit that we could handle here. as technology advances, previously we have been talking about frozen sperms. Frozen sperms means that before fertilization had taken place, a husband chooses to keep his sperm somewhere in the bank and it is frozen in the fridge. Then at another time, the doctors know that maybe they will unfreeze it, and then after that it can be fertilized with the ovum. That is frozen sperm. But now, as science and technology advances, you go to another level that is called now frozen embryos. You know, frozen embryos. It's no longer sperms now. Now, the difference between frozen sperms and frozen embryos is that the freezing now, the keeping in the fridge, it takes place after fertilization. Frozen sperms before fertilization. But now what happens is that a couple can go into a sperm clinic, and then the female ova is taken out of the lady, and then the sperms are taken out of the gentleman, because they want actually to fertilize them so that these two can get a child. Now, what doctors actually do is that they fertilize multiple embryos. You get it? Why are they doing that? They are doing that so that in case of failure, because don't think that the first attempt is going to be successful. I have heard from people who have actually gone for that. You can have several attempts. It is done, it is implanted, then the miscarriage takes place. So not to go back to the first step of fertilization, what doctors will do is that they are going to fertilize multiple embryos. Then they keep them. You know, in other words, you will be already fertilized, and then you keep somewhere in the fridge. In other words, you have some children, you know, who are kept in the fridge. I don't know for how long. You get it? That's what we call the idea of frozen what? Embryos. Now, what happens is that after these embryos have been frozen, and this woman, this couple, suppose it is legally married, is going to be injected with one so that they can watch it. If it succeeds, alhamdulillah. If it doesn't succeed, when the woman comes back, then there is no requirement of calling for the husband to get the sperms, because there is already a deposit of a frozen embryo. So they'll just get the embryo and inject it back into the what? Into the woman. Now, the question is still here is that, is this allowed in Sharia or it is not allowed? You know, the first one was frozen sperms. Now we are talking about the frozen embryos.
The frozen embryo, we get the gametes.
Yeah.
The one of the husband and the wife.
Yes.
We fertilize them.
Yeah.
We keep them, and then we put to the wife. She goes. Then we wait for some time to see whether it will be successful.
Yeah.
If not, she comes back. We do the same.
Yes.
That's what we understand.
Exactly. If the first time succeeds, you know, the couple might decide to go to the clinic or to the fertility clinic to destroy the other embryos. But there is also another question that will come in here. Aren't they killing a soul? Isn't this qatlun nafs? You know, now this is where you could see the significance of fiqh. You know, isn't this qatlun nafs? Because this is already formed. So if the couple goes back and say that, please, alhamdulillah, our first attempt succeeded, and now we want to destroy them, the question will be, are you not going to recite for them, وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ فِيهَا أَنَّهُ مَنْ قَتَلَ نَفْسًا بِغَيْرِ نَفْسٍ أَوْ فَسَادٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَكَأَنَّمَا قَتَلَ النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُمْ رَحِيمًا. We are not going to take that because وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ خَشْيَةَ إِمْلَاقٍ and so on. You know, this is another line that we cannot take now. But let us concentrate on using the frozen embryos. This form, actually, the scholars had that it is prohibited. You know, there is no any difference between scholars. This form is prohibited. Why is it prohibited? It is prohibited because of the Sharia inconsistencies, the Sharia prohibitions that are involved in it. You know, why are they saying that it is involved in it? sorry. Why are they saying that this kind of arrangement is not allowed? You could see that at one side, you see that the idea of having this child, okay, the fertilization taking place, then have it, then freeze the embryos. Now, the first question, for instance, if I ask you, having stayed for some time in the fridge, how old are you? What will you tell me? You know, if I ask you, how old are you? Shall we be looking at the date from the date of fertilization? Because our wives, when they conceive, they are going to start counting this pregnancy thing, you know? Yeah, and that's why they give them the expected date.
But the Ahli Dhikr will be in position to answer.
The Ahli Dhikr will be in position to say, but by the way, the strong reason that was advanced by scholars in this is that human beings, if they reach to that extent, then I don't know whether we call it, it is so much despising, you know, of the dignity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accorded to human beings. In other words, this is extreme. And because of this, first of all, you know that we only resorted to assisted reproductive technologies because of necessity, because of varura. And in Sharia, there is that principle which says that al-darurat tuqaddar biqadriha. We must keep within the limits of necessity. We shouldn't go. But it's like to scholars that this is now too much. And therefore, if you reach that extent, then it is not allowed. The other issue is that Sharia has allowed you, you know, to have the insemination, because the moment the fertilization takes place, they are going to inject one into your wife. You get it? Then the necessity of keeping others, it is not there. So if the necessity is not there according to Sharia, especially that one has already been implanted in your wife, then it goes without saying that we cannot allow you to use it later. That is how the scholars talk about it. I know.
I'm just seeing the degree of uncertainty.
Yeah. So, you know, those are the issues that Sharia addressed. But maybe in the interest of time, I want to throw some small light on surrogacy.
Really, we have a lot of questions.
Yes, I understand the audience has a lot of questions about surrogacy. But I can tell you that surrogacy arrangement itself needs series. But let me try. It needs series. Let me try to summarize it. Generally speaking, surrogate motherhood takes three main forms. The first is between the married partners. Can I use you as an example?
Student, why not?
Between Abdul Hakim, we have Abdul Hakim and his wife who? Saidat. Okay? Now, Saidat is having some challenges of sustaining a pregnancy. Whenever she conceives, she experiences miscarriage. What she does under the first form is that Abdul Hakim is having a second wife. Shadia, the second wife. Now, in that case, Shadia is not having any issues with bearing the pregnancies. So what happens is that Abdul Hakim agrees with Saidat. Let us have our gametes fertilized. Then let Shadia keep for us the child. Okay. In other words, it is Shadia who is going now to take the pregnancy on. On arrangement that after Shadia had given birth to the child, you get my point? That child now shall be given to Saidat, because Saidat is the producer of the ovum. That is the first form of surrogate motherhood. In other words, it is taking place between within the legally married people, within one home, within a family,
a legal family.
Exactly. Number two is where it takes place between marrieds. Okay, Abdul Hakim and Saidat. Are we together? However, Abdul Hakim this time does not have a second wife, but there is a volunteer woman around who will say that for me, I have no problem with carrying pregnancies. So the garments of the married couple is fertilized, they are joined, and then they are implanted in Amina, who is not having any relationship with Abdul Hakim. You get it? So that is the second form. Now the third form is whereby there is no even marriage between Abdul Hakim and Saidat. You get it? Just like this time, I'm not going to use your example. Any man around,
So nice.
you know, okay? Any man around is having interest in a certain woman around. They are not legally married. They agree to pick her ovum and his sperm, fertilize them, then seek for any woman around so that that woman can carry the pregnancy on their behalf. Those are the three forms. But quickly speaking, is the first form allowed? You know? It is between a family
Which is legally married.
which is legally married. Abdul Hakim is having his two wives and one has volunteered. Isn't that among the التعاون على البر والتقوى?
Doctor, in which situation are you talking about?
No, okay. I don't want to go into the issue of she will accept or she will not accept. But isn't this part of وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى? Help each other in issues of piety and the issues of good. You get it? Good causes. And if that is the case, is it allowed according to Sharia? Now, the summary is, first of all, this arrangement was just suggested by scholars in their sitting, the 7th sitting of the Islamic Fiqh Academy. Because in the Western countries, actually they don't have this because they don't have polygamous relationships. But the Muslim scholars in their 7th sitting of the Islamic Fiqh Academy, they suggested this. That is why sometimes you accuse me of always inclining towards Abu Hanifa.
Actually, one time I was asking you, why is it that for us we are Shafi scholars?
No problem. Abu Hanifa made a substantive contribution to the development of fiqh by bringing assumptions in fiqh. That's what we call al-masail al-iftiradiyya. Suppose. So this matter, or this case, was assumed by the scholars in the 7th sitting of the Islamic Fiqh Academy. And you know what happened? A section of scholars accepted it. They said there is no problem. As long as you guarantee that the garments are not going to be mixed, as long as there is necessity.
We are on case one.
We are on case one. And as a matter of fact, Saidat is having that necessity. She also needs the blessing of having a child. But her uterus or her womb cannot sustain the pregnancy. And Sharia is willing to volunteer. So why not? So that's why you find out that if there is consent between the two and there is necessity, then there is no problem. Some scholars in the first sitting, they actually went into in favor of what? In favor of that. Now, this is of course based on the fact that both of them are your wives, you are the husband, and
they have agreed.
They have agreed. There is consent. But do you know, hardly, subhanallah, that's why I always urge all those people in the field of da'wah, the field of fiqh, to be very, very careful with fiqh. Can you imagine that concentration of Muslim scholars went by that opinion? You get it? Apart from few of them who dissented, who actually said that, for us, we are in the mid position. You get it? They forget. Allah did not enable them to click to the fact that much as you, Abdul Hakim, you are relating legally to Saidat, relating legally to Sharia, and there is no problem for your garments to enter in any of the two. But what's the relationship between Sharia and Saidat?
They share my garments.
You get it? You know? Yes, it is okay with you. For you, you have no problem. There is legality. But is there an Islamic legality between now Saida's ovum to cross to the womb of Sharia? You get it? Now just imagine that a collection, the concentration of highly the intellectuals of Islam, wallahi, Allah made them not to see that. Do we get that one? Until the second sitting. And you know what actually made them to wake up? Subhanallah. You know, the Majma al-Fiqh al-Islami that time, it was being chaired by the late Ibn Baz. After agreeing on certain resolutions, they signed that now this is the resolution. When they took the paper to Ibn Baz to sign, he said, Atawakaf. Tawakuf is like, I don't say it is haram, no, I don't say is it, but I am in the mid position.
I am restraining.
I'm just in that kind of voltage, you know? Now that made them to have a second thinking. And on thinking again, actually the second sitting ruled in prohibition, that it is not allowed. You know why? Go to Surah Al-Mu'minun and Surah Al-Ma'arij. And these are the verses that we want to end with. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. And those who guard their private parts, isn't it? إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ. Except to their wives and those that, the captives that they actually have their right hands possess, isn't it? Then Allah says that فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ. When they do that, when you have your sexual enjoyment, your procreation through your spouse, there is no problem. Then Allah says, فَمَنِ ابْتَغَى وَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ. Anything that goes beyond that limit, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ. Those are the transgressors. Now, when we handle the first case between one family and it is prohibited, then you don't talk about the rest. I think we can end.
Doctor, no, don't cross that. You know, having summarized that, you have even answered the other surrogacy of the Western world, where they keep babies for money.
Yeah.
And, you know, I and maybe Saidat, we feel like we shouldn't, we cannot, or we don't want, and then we get the garments, and then we get them to another specific woman for money purposes. And I think if this one, which looks to be a little bit
halal,
it has been prohibited.
Yes.
I think we don't have time.
I think that is a good summary. You know what you are talking about? No. The last time I was studying about surrogacy, it is actually good business in India. Because the Indian ladies, especially those under the poverty line, people come from London because for them they are corporate ladies, they don't have time for pregnancy and so on. So they come with their frozen embryos. And then you get it? Then inject them in the Indian women. Then after that, this Indian woman is kept, you know, in the hospital, and she's being monitored. After that, she calls the couple in UK that please come and pick your what? Pick your child.
Let me pick the questions here.
Okay.
Doctor, with all due respect, key scholars have written about this and the ARTs. But as you are coming in, for me, my summary, I'm also with the Dr. Adam. I'm seeing the degree of uncertainty in ARTs is beyond and to me, I don't know, because you are open to scholarly views. But from your explanations, really, I'm seeing a lot of uncertainty, and you are one of those who advocate for issues with a lot of uncertainty we should leave. I don't know whether Muslims somewhere have a room for ARTs.
Okay.
Yes, so please come in and answer such that we close the program.
Jazakumullahu khairan. Thank you so much, our audience. Of course, this is a sensitive matter.
But before that, brother here, I think, is in the US, saying that for the lecture, No, he wanted to remind us that there is a fertility doctor in America who is interested to help ladies to obtain children. Instead, he injected most of them with his own sperm. The man had a peculiar physical features, and all his kids were both looking like him. He was prosecuted, and is currently serving a long prison sentence. Diligence is highly needed in some of these ventures. These are the uncertainties.
True. Thank you so much, our brother. I should start with the last because it's very important. And Alhamdulillah for our brother in the US who has actually reminded us of that. In our previous episode, I don't know whether he hinted on it or not, but among the first cases of artificial insemination, the husband was having issues with fertility. He went to the fertility clinic. The medical doctor diagnosed him and concluded that actually his sperms cannot fertilize an egg from his wife. What the doctor did was to request one of the students on internship, his students on internship, to donate sperms. When his wife went to visit the same clinic, he injected the sperms of the internees to this woman, and actually the woman conceived. But this doctor was honest enough. He actually revealed this letter to the husband, and the husband decided to keep it as a secret. After all, for him, he wanted a child. So what our brother is talking about in USA is a very, very serious point that actually wives, ladies should take note of. Due diligence, as he said. It is much, much needed because not all of them are honest. Actually, a certain medical doctor might find out that an anomaly is on the side of the husband, and he chooses actually to have sexual intercourse with this woman. And there is a saying that what happens in Vegas remains in Vegas. They will never reveal such. You get it? So, it is a very serious question. Thank you so much, our brother from the USA. Okay. Brother Zaid, I want to go that way. Brother Zaid was experiencing some challenges in the network, but I thought being in the UK and they are our colonial masters, they shouldn't be suffering from such. But maybe he can go to our YouTube channel, and maybe he's a fan of Salam TV because he's a great colleague of Al-Haji Kalisa. So inshallah, he shall find us there, shall find the explanation there. Brother Adam Musa is talking about the fatigue and the stress. Of course, it is there. The stress of keeping on, looking for a child, having hope. You try this, it doesn't succeed. Really, it is a very serious stress. But I can also assure you that as long as there is that hope, the couple shall do all what is within the means to go for it. It's like a saying that I will fight up to the last drop of my blood. You get it? So, yes, that fatigue is there, and people shouldn't think that it's just a bed of roses. It's as simple as we are explaining it. Brother Adam Musa is also saying that given that assisted reproductive technologies is still having those issues, but maybe where I want not to agree with him, there have been several tests that have been done, and as there have been very many success stories. Maybe the uncertainties now is in the success, but the certainty that it is possible, it is not anymore. What is there is that, of course, there is a difference between what is natural and what is Chinese, what is artificial. That's as a matter of fact. So once you go for this artificial insemination, you have no guarantee. By the way, if you have uncertainty in the natural one, what about the artificial one? So This kind of uncertainties, can't they lead to the change of the fatwas in the future? You know, why not? The principle of Sharia is لا ينكر تغير الأحكام بتغير الأزمان. You know, it is not taken in a bad faith that a Sharia ruling can change with the change of times, with the change of places. That is why I always emphasize that some fatwa shouldn't be imported or exported. You know, so if the situation changes in the future and we find out that these assisted reproductive technologies are now mad with a lot of uncertainties, with a lot of Sharia inconsistencies, there is no much care and concern and honesty about the process, then the rule shall change. The scholars will come back and they will study the process and they bring out the inconsistencies, the issues, the doubts and so on. Then they will issue the fatwa to prohibit or to limit. There is also, by the way, another topic in fiqh. That topic is known as taqyidul mubah, you know, limiting the permissible. The imam has a right to limit what is permissible. It's called taqyidul mubah. You know, for instance, when we are in COVID-19, the president limited what is acceptable, isn't it? We used to move free and do it, but he came out and said that it is limited. So within that, even if something has been held to be permissible, still that room is there for the Muslim authorities that they can limit it, they can temporarily suspend it because of some issues that have changed in the community. You know, so that is to the best of my address to what Brother Adam Musa had addressed. Now, someone who raised the issue of donors, sperm donors, you know, hiring of the uterus, that one we have already addressed. Yes. You know, in the books of Fiqh, they call them ar-rahimul musta'ar, the hired uterus, you know, and if offering it for free is prohibited, then you talk about hiring. You know, so it is by greater reason that even hiring is what? It is prohibited. Okay, now, the question asked by Brother Gava, that this woman had been oppressed in the lifetime of the husband.
Now she's having the
now that the husband is dead, she has regained her freedom. No, that is, in Sharia, it is not acceptable in such a way. First of all, the sperms are not a property where a woman has right to conduct herself in any way that she wants. Remember, we are addressing the issue of procreation. And procreation takes the third place among the 5 necessities that the Sharia came to guard tightly. You know, we have the hifz ad-din, protection of our religion, followed by life, followed by family. And this is where procreation takes place. That's why we cannot just open door for the use of assisted reproductive technologies, because it is affecting the third necessity that the Sharia came to safeguard. So in this case, what permission does this woman has after the husband has died? If it is a matter of operation, amruha inda rabbiha, you know, let her take her matter before Allah, but she cannot actually use, she cannot say that now I have gained my freedom and therefore I am free to do whatever I want to do after the death of the what? Of the husband. And maybe I could easily add that those are games of the cowards. Yeah. Those are games of the cowards. If you feel that you have been oppressed, defend yourself before the oppressor as long as the oppressor is still around. But you wait for the oppressor to die and you say that you are celebrating your freedom. I think to me that is a game of a coward. Anyway, finally, Brother Sulaiman asked a fundamental question, and that's why I told you that the topic on surrogacy, it takes a series, but I wanted to summarize it. Now, the issue that Sulaiman raised about a woman being injected with the sperms of the fallen husband, then she goes into sexual intercourse, and maybe she conceives. You get it? Now, first, where do we establish the parentage? You know, that confusion in the establishment of the parentage is actually what leads us to prohibition. You know why I'm saying that? For instance, let's go back even to that form that we thought it is allowed. It could be halal. Abdul Hakim, Saidat, Shadia. You get my point? In that situation, suppose that Sharia had allowed it. Suppose that it had succeeded. If I may ask, who is the biological mother of the child? Who is the biological mother of that child? Before you think about the biological mother, are we together? Who is the legal mother of the child?
The legal mother of the child is the one who has produced the child.
You see? But the one who had produced the ovum will say that this is my own child. Even when we go by DNA testing, it will show that, isn't it? But don't you know in Sharia that the legal motherhood is by birth? In ummahatum illa la'i waladnahum. You get it? So Sharia is talking about motherhood. The true mother is the one who carried the baby and the one who produced. Now, you are going to find another tug of war here. You know, Saidat is saying that this is my biological child because I'm the one who produced the ovum. And this one is going to say that, no, I'm the one who actually did what? Let me pose another question for contemplation. After Shadia has carried this embryo for Abdul Hakim and Saidat, who is likely to breastfeed the child? Who develops the breast milk of the two?
The producer.
The producer. You get it? Now, setting that one aside, don't you know that it's even possible, because these are both your children, so both are your wives. Don't you think it is possible that the fertilized embryo between you and Saidat was implanted in Shadia, and now maybe she had a miscarriage secretly and it went out, and because you are meeting both of them, now
she has become pregnant also.
You get it? So all this kind of confusion is the one which led scholars to say that this kind of arrangement is not acceptable.
Look at the art of uncertainty.
The art of uncertainty. The conclusion. Those who attended our first lecture when we are preparing people to accept barrenness, to accept a situation whereby Allah has actually decided that the door is closed, I think this is the conclusion that we can make. The conclusion is, when you see that really the level of uncertainty is too high, why don't you accept وَيَجْعَلُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ عَقِيمًا, and you settle with that, and you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to compensate you because of missing that blessing on this dunya. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Jazakumullahu khair.
We thank Dr. Hafiz, we thank the Mixed Media, Salam TV, we thank the Islamic University in Uganda for giving us this wonderful facilitation for the broadcast. We thank the team, we thank you, those who are following us for this wonderful insight. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله